With Star Trek The Next Generation in full swing, and fandom once again being able to get a weekly dose of Star Trek, no one was quite sure what would happen if Paramount released a new film. But one thing was certain: in order to keep the film franchise alive, the fifth movie in the series had to be a remarkable blockbuster of a film. Instead, we got Star Trek V: The Final Frontier. Hello and welcome to Backtrek, a web series that focuses on the background information of any given topic in Star Trek. In this, the continuation of our look into Star Trek's history, we'll be taking a look at the making of Star Trek V: The Final Frontier, and all the drama that surrounded the making of this box office flop. I hope you enjoy. Well, here we are again, trekking through another one of the Star Trek feature films, but this one I was regretting having to make, not because I think it's bad, as some of you might think, but rather it's very sad. I truly respect William Shatner and what he tried to make here, and it's just truly unfortunate that the stars didn't align for him and that he would get the rap for making one of the worst Star Trek films of all time. With Star Trek III: The Search for Spock and Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home being great successes for Paramount, it was clear almost right away that there would in fact be another Star Trek film. Leonard Nimoy had really delivered with his two films, and fandom sat back waiting to see what his mastermind would come up with next. Meanwhile, William Shatner wasn't really feeling another movie, at least not as how things were currently standing. Speaking with Nimoy, Shatner laid out his reservations about being in a fifth film, basically that at the time Star Trek for him had lost its luster. And after listening to his friend, Nimoy made a suggestion that would reinvigorate Shatner to the point of elation. Nimoy reminded Shatner of the favored nations clause in their contract, which guaranteed both the actors to receive the same privileges and positions along with the pay within each of the Star Trek movies. And as such, Shatner could demand that he direct the next film. Pondering this revelation for the next little while, Shatner went into Paramount Pictures and did just as Nimoy had suggested, ready to put up a fight. He was surprised when the idea was met with enthusiasm, and Paramount almost immediately got on board with Shatner directing the next picture. It's not hard to figure out what Paramount was thinking. With TNG becoming a thing for television, Captain Kirk directing Star Trek V would be an excellent hook that they could use to sell this picture to the fans. Heading home, Shatner began to think of possible story ideas for his brilliant movie, and while watching television evangelists late at night, he decided his movie would be about the Enterprise crew finding God. And with this idea in his head, he approached Paramount president Frank Mancuso, who, although having reservations about the idea, greenlit the project for Shatner to proceed. To write the script, Shatner approached thriller and fantasy author Eric Van Losbader. But when Paramount and Eric couldn't agree on the rights to the novelization of the story, Shatner enlisted writer David Lowery to bring his ideas to the page. William Shatner's first outline for the film would have been a much darker tale, and would have seen the first true falling out between Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. And this initial idea would cause huge problems for Shatner when Nimoy and Kelly read the initial outline. Both men refused to play that plot element, believing their characters would never betray Kirk as Shatner had envisioned. Nimoy especially had a problem with the story idea, stating that there was no chance whatsoever that Spock would ever turn on Kirk, especially after what Kirk had risked and sacrificed for Spock in Star Trek III. Attempting to change both men's minds, Shatner begged and pleaded for them to play the characters as they were, but both men held their ground, and Shatner was forced to change the script element to accommodate them. In more recent years, Shatner has admitted that if someone else had come in and written a scenario where Kirk would turn against Spock and McCoy, he too would have raised the roof over it. But nevertheless, Shatner said he still would have loved to have seen and been able to play the original version of this particular scenario. Upon receiving the outline, Gene Roddenberry too was livid. He was so mad about it that he actually tried to begin legal proceedings against Shatner and Paramount to prevent this movie from being made. However, due to his contract, Gene couldn't proceed with the lawsuit and thus was forced to just swallow his anger and move on. You see, Gene's problem actually stemmed from Star Trek the Motion Picture. One of Gene's initial ideas for that movie was to have the crew seek out God, and Gene had loved his story immensely. But when Gene presented the script and its idea to Paramount, they flat out refused it and sent him back to the drawing board. Now, here comes William Shatner with a very similar idea, and Paramount bought it hook, line, and sinker. The situation was made even worse in Gene's head when his personal secretary Susan Sackett was given a copy of the script, and after virtually each page kept exclaiming to Gene, "I can't believe it, he stole your idea." And the last kick in the nacelles for Gene was that while Gene was writing the God Thing, the story that he had intended for Star Trek the Motion Picture, Shatner had met up with him, and Gene had relayed the entire story outline to Shatner. And even though very similar to Gene's story, never once did Shatner approach Gene to help flesh out this idea. So Gene was mad, and Gene was hurt, and the relationship between these two men would never recover. A little piece of Trek trivia for you all here is that when Kirk returns to the bridge of the Enterprise for the first time in the movie, he is given his uniform jacket by a yeoman. This yeoman was actually played by Shatner's youngest daughter, actress Melanie Shatner. Co-writer and producer Harve Bennett initially didn't want anything to do with this movie, as his relationships with several key production staffers, in particular with Leonard Nimoy, had started to deteriorate during the making of Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home. But mostly, Harve was fed up with Gene's constant attempts at interfering. But Shatner wanted Bennett on the movie, and since they had developed a great friendship over the years, eventually Shatner was able to convince him to join the production. A little bit more Trek trivia for you all here is that Harve Bennett would actually make a cameo in this film as the Admiral who sends the Enterprise to Nimbus 3 at the beginning of the movie. Star Trek V: The Final Frontier was slated for a June 1989 release, so right off the bat, Shatner's film had problems. 1988 would see the Writers Guild of America go on strike, and Leonard Nimoy would agree to direct another film called The Good Mother. These events caused almost an entire year's delay for the film, and because of these events, the film's pre-production and shooting schedule had to be severely trimmed. Paramount also wanted Lightning to strike twice, as it were, and set a demand on Shatner to make the film as comedic as Star Trek IV had been, which didn't really fit in with the theme that Shatner intended for the movie. Industrial Light and Magic, who had done an amazing job with the previous Trek films, was expected to come on board for the fifth film, but this also didn't happen. ILM had to bow out of the production as they were too busy doing the effects for Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, along with the effects for Ghostbusters 2. And so the job of all the special effects went to the lesser-known company Associates and Farron. And the result was poor quality and in some cases obviously unfinished special effects shots. So bad was the special effects shots for this film that several stock footage shots had to be used in the final product. These include the shots of the Enterprise in space dock, which are from the end of Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home, shots of the Klingon bird of prey from Star Trek III: The Search for Spock, the spiraling starfield from Kirk's unfinished log entry was taken from the opening title sequence of Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, and even the torpedo shot from the Enterprise during the film's climax was a slightly recolored reuse of V'ger's energy bolt from Star Trek the Motion Picture. But Shatner trekked on, determined to make an excellent film, seeing these problems as challenges rather than doom itself knocking at his door. The budget for this film was set at about $28 million US, Now, that may not sound like a lot, but you have to remember the previous films, like Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, which is considered one of the best Star Trek films of all time, had a budget of only around $12 million. Star Trek III: The Search for Spock had a budget of around $16 million, while Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home came in at approximately $21 million. Shatner has often blamed Paramount for not realizing his great story, his vision being almost double the budget they were willing to give him. But this really isn't the problem with Star Trek V at all. The real problem is, of course, with the story itself. And when we next return to this Star Trek historical overview, we'll take a look at that story, along with the film's production, to explain why this movie was such a box office bomb. Hope to see you then. Thank you for watching today's episode of Backtrek. What do you think of Star Trek V: The Final Frontier? Do you think it deserves all the negative hype it gets from fandom? Well, leave your comments in the section below. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel, hitting that little bell icon so you won't miss a single video we release. Want to help the channel find God? Then consider becoming a channel patron. The link to our Patreon account is in the description below. Thanks again for watching, and remember, what does God need with a starship?